Hello, I have a 2007 Honda Odyssey and it's been leaking power steering fluid. At first I thought it was an oil leak because when I was changing the oil it was all over the oil pan and it was really hard to tell where it was coming from. Finally figured out that it's power steering fluid, and so we're going to be in just a moment, we'll be taking off the engine cover and then we'll get a closer look at that. I just want to show you, I'm not sure this is going to fix the problem, but it's a common problem on these to have O-ring leaks in the power steering pump at the top and bottom. So we're going to change both of those out. So everything invested to try this fix is about $10. So I'm going to show you what I purchased to do this job. Okay, so two O-rings. This orange one is for the lower hose, and there's the Honda part number 91345 RDA A01, and then the black for the black O-ring for the upper hose, and there is that Honda part number 91370 SB4000. And then so those two combined were like $2 or something, and then 12 ounces of Honda power steering fluid, and because we'll need to top it off when we're done, and that was a little over $4 or something like that. And then at Harbor Freight I picked up this test probe set. It's for O-ring removal and some other things that came with all this. It was $3 and something, so about 10 bucks for all this stuff. I'll be using a flathead screwdriver to remove the engine cover, and then I have a 10mm socket driver and a 10mm wrench. I'm not sure how hard it's going to be to get to these bolts, but they take 10mm, so we're going to get started. The first thing we do is use a flathead screwdriver to get these two front screws, and they just get turned a quarter turn, and then that should allow us to remove this engine cover. So we just remove those a quarter turn, and then it comes right up, and so we're going to set that aside. That exposes the engine. So right here is where we're going to be working. This is the power steering pump. We're going to be dealing with the O-ring. This is the lower hose. That's the one with the orange O-ring. That's the hardest part of this job, is getting that off of there. There's a 10mm bolt underneath that hose that's got to come off. And then this upper hose coming in right here, this has these two bolts that will come off. Those are a lot easier to get to, and we'll replace the black O-ring, and then we'll put those back on. Then we'll remove this red cap on top of our power steering fluid. We'll start the car, let any air out. We'll put that red cap back on, and we'll fill our level up to the fill line on there, which is this line right here. So we're just down a little bit because I've been keeping it topped off while I've been trying to figure out what to do about it. So I'm not low on fluid, but we'll top it off when we're done. We'll lose a little bit of fluid, so I'm gonna place a rag down here underneath this hose and just see what it takes for me to get to that bolt under there. Okay, so the hardest part is getting this 10mm box end wrench on the bolt. That's the most frustrating part. But now we did get this bottom hose off. And so this has a black O-ring on it. The new one is orange. So we're going to take this O-ring off and put on the orange one. Okay, so I got the old black O-ring off and put the new orange one on. And although I did buy that cheap set of picks from Harbor Freight for $3 and something, I will say that for this job it was not necessary. I went ahead and used one of them, but the O-ring is easy enough to get to where you could either roll it off with just your fingers or use a screwdriver and just be gentle on the plastic, not to dig into anything, but really came off pretty easily. So now we're going to put that back on. Okay, so the hardest part of this entire job is loosening the 10mm bolt under this lower hose. So there's too small of an area there to get any kind of fancy socket ratcheting equipment, and so basically you're just left with a box end, open end 10mm wrench. You can see this is the only way it can go in there without taking apart other things. So the closed end or boxed end is on the nut right now. You can see it travels under the belt. If you try to put it on too high, it'll hit this pulley. So you got to go down enough to where it'll clear that pulley, still get on there. And then at the other end, you've got to make sure that this wiring harness is unclipped so that as you move the wrench downward, you can move it out of the way to get a little bit of travel. And so what you're going to want to do is, it seems like you're making extremely small progress, but you just have to keep putting it in the upward position like this, pushing it down, taking it off, doing it again and again and again, until finally you can kind of push in on this so it's close to the metal, until you can put a finger down on either side and finish it off by hand. So I got that done. I changed the O-ring, and now I'm putting it back on. Well, a note for that. Again, that bolt that goes in there is pretty long, and so if you go ahead and push this back on and then you have a bolt in your hand, you're not going to be able to see anything under there, and you're not going to have room to put it in, and you're in danger of dropping it. So go ahead, while it's off, put the bolt in the hole, and then put this on while you have your fingers wrapped around the bottom of it holding the bolt, and then you line that up and get it started by hand. And so the key there is, again, to make good contact with the metal piece, keeping that level, and then you just do everything you can by hand, and that's where I'm at now. So now I'm gonna just do small increments of this wrench. This time I'm tightening it, so I'll start with the wrench in a downward position and come up to where it's at right now. So I'm going to do that, and then this lower hose will be done, and we'll move on to the upper one. Alright, so the good news is, putting the hose back on, because of the way I started it with the screw bolted by hand and then did it by hand as much as I could, it only took like 2 or 3 tightenings to get it tight. So that is done. So now this top one are these 2 bolts, and there's plenty of room here. So I've got a 10mm, and so we're just gonna take both of these off, and we'll pull that one out and do the same thing. Okay, so I got the 2 top bolts loosened, and of course when you loosen these, fluid does come out, so I've got a rag under it, but just want to show you that, you know, that's what's underneath going into the pump. Okay, so this is the O-ring. So now that tool that I have probably will be helpful to get that O-ring off. So we're going to do that right now. So this tool looks like this. There's several of them, but this seems to be a good shape for work like this. So I'm just going to put the phone down because I can't do this one-handed. But I'm just going to see how easy it is to pick it out of there with this. Okay, now I feel better about spending the $3 on that pick set at Harbor Freight, because it definitely was helpful getting that off of there. And then putting the new one on, I forgot to mention, I think when I did the other one, that you're supposed to dip your finger in the power steering fluid and coat your new O-ring with it before you put it on. So anyway, it went on really easily. I didn't need to use any tools to put it on. I was able to just put it on by hand. And so now we're going to put it back on. Put our 2 bolts back in. Okay, so we got the top one back on, and we're done. All we have to do is put the engine cover back on and do a half turn or quarter turn of our 2 bolts there in the front that hold the engine cover on. But I noticed I lost a lot of fluid here when I did that lower hose, and so even though I had a rag there, I can see that it's gotten on the belt a little bit. So while I have this engine cover off and can see in there, I'm going to go ahead and use a little bit of engine degreaser and a hose and just clean that off before I put the engine cover back on. So that concludes this job, and I will refill the power steering reservoir back to the fill line, especially since we lost so much fluid doing the job. But in summary, as far as tools go, we're not able to use this, so you don't need that. So regular screwdriver to get your engine cover off and on, a box end 10mm wrench, and then some sort of 10mm socket wrench, and the 2 O-rings and some power steering fluid. And so over time we'll find out if that works. So I hope that helps somebody. Sometimes I get asked how to clean my engine, and I just did a job where I spilled some power steering fluid on a belt, so I'm going to do that. So I use this Meguiar's Super Degreaser. I just put a small amount in a spray bottle like this, like maybe just that much, and then maybe put that much water in it. So that's what I'm going to do right now. Okay, I have my engine cover off because I was doing some work on the power steering pump. Got some power steering fluid on some things like this hose, this whole area right here. So I'm gonna spray that with this degreaser. Spray this belt really well. See if I can get down in there because it got really wanting to get it off that belt. There we go. You pretty much do this anywhere if you have a dirt. My engine's really not that dirty otherwise. Alright, so you can spray that on the dirty parts. You can tell this is already a very clean motor. So what we're going to do is you can agitate it with a brush. On the parts that you can get to. And then we're going to take a hose put it on a shower setting where it's not too powerful. And by cleaning it, I'll also be able to tell if my leak stops, because that's what I was doing, was fixing a power steering leak by replacing the O-rings right here and right here. So by cleaning this area, that'll help me determine if my leak has stopped as well. Alright, so we're done. Okay, so finished this job yesterday. The vehicle's been driven a little bit. So far, so good. No leaks right now. Completely dry under there, where it used to be very wet down in there below this hose right here is definitely one of the spots that was leaking. Not sure that the top was ever leaking, but right now it's dry, and that's after I did the job, changed the O-rings last night. My wife drove this vehicle today, and so far so good. And the level has not changed, it's still full. So those are all good things.